Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Sarah Maliga,
Present.
Commissioner Christopher McVoy,
Here.
Commissioner Kimberly Stokes.
Here.
Thank you. We're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Stokes.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sit down, you almost skyrocket.
It's wonderful.
Nice.
I approve.
Okay, first we have public hearings. Item A, Resolution 58-2021, first public hearing, adopt the fiscal year 2021-2022 tentative millage rate and set the second public hearing for September 22nd, 2021. Mr. Miller, do you have a presentation?
A very short one, and actually, I'm going to defer to Andre McAdam since he was kind enough to prepare.
Okay, take it away. Okay.
For the record, Andre McAdam, controller. Tentative millage rate for the city is not going to change from last year. Our rates, our regular millage rate for operating is 5.4945, and the fire MSTU millage rate is 3.4581. It has a total millage rate of 8.95.
Okay, thank you. Well, I see light on. Commissioner Maliga.
Okay, not to throw a wrench in it, but I've added to backup. And I guess we can email this to Mr. McVoy because I didn't know he wasn't here. A list of the 2020 Palm Beach County final millage rates. We are extremely high. We are trying to be better stewards of our money by creating fiscal policies. Thanks to the financial, they are doing that. So I would just like us to think the future for next year, that we really consider hard lowering our rates. We are trying to get more people to move into our home. We're talking about increasing electric rates. And I think that to create that energy of people wanting to move here, showing that we have created sound financial policies, thanks to our financial team and the things that they're putting in place, I would really like us to be mindful that next year, I would like to revisit this before we come forward on the first budget hearing and see if we can lower those millage rates to be more in line with our surrounding neighbors.
I think that's good. A lot of us, we have, four of us came on in the middle of the budget session, essentially. So part of this is learning. Commissioner Stokes.
I just have a question here about why the Lake Worth one that's been circled here, why it's listed under unincorporated.
It's not.
No, it's two rows.
Oh, it's two rows. Okay, I was like looking.
Yeah, I feel better.
was like, wait a minute.
I feel better.
Wait a minute, because I know there is an unincorporated Lake Worth. So
We're reading right to left. We're reading.
Okay, so I
don't put it
agree, and I
so
think
like
that one of our goals as the commission had we pretty clearly stated that we got to be careful. We got to find new ways to make money, have a bake sale. And I appreciate your comments. So are there any public cards, Madam Clerk?
There are not, Madam Mayor.
Do I have a motion?
motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
thank you. Moving right along. Item B, Resolution 59-2021, first public hearing. Adopt the debt service rate and set the second public hearing for September 22nd, 2021. Mr. Miller, for your presentation?
It's all wrapped up in the same.
In the giant book, in the big book?
To the presentation that he just provided.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any public comment cards, Madam Clerk?
We do not, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
Second by
I'll second.
Commissioner Stokes. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
Aye.
All right, moving right along. That was B. Item C, Resolution 60-2021, the first public hearing about the fiscal year 2021-2022 proposed city budget and set the second public hearing for September 22nd, 2021. Mr. Miller is bringing up his book.
Yes. I'll do a page turner, just to make sure that we're.
And those of us up on the dais, now that I've done some Zoom, I really understand what the clerk is talking about when we start flipping pages. It's really hard. So if we could gently.
All right, before you, for consideration, are the operating budget for the departments and then the capital budget. So I'm gonna go through each, if you will, by department. And then through the different enterprise funds, and then go into the capital budget. So bear with me, but before I move forward, what I would like to talk about is what are the changes for the fiscal year 2022 budget. As you know, we went through several different steps to provide a balanced budget. You have the analysis that we did, but in general, the budget before you is pretty much a level service budget. Level service meaning that it's the same goods and services, if you will, that is provided for fiscal year 21 is being recommended for fiscal year 22. There are uncontrollable costs in the operating budget. The biggest one for fiscal year 22 were the pension increases across the different pension plans. Beyond that, there was a 2% increase in the public safety contract, I should say sheriff's contract. And then throughout the budget, there's salary increases or potential salary increases. And those cost of goods that were increased. Beyond that, if I may, we went through as part of the budget preparation sequence. And as you know, there are several different additional positions that are also included. And those positions for the general fund being a grant specialist at 50% for the year, 2 accountants, an accountant 2 and accountant 3, which is recommended for funding for 100% of the year. The reason why it wasn't dropped down to 50% is because we need these people at the beginning of the fiscal year, or we're going to be right back in the same situation where they audit. So we're trying to get ahead of that curve. So it gives be why they're recommended for 100% funding. Communication specialists at 50%, special events, no, I can't say it. Special events specialist at 50%, and a assistant user services director for and also at 50%. So those are the primary drivers of the increase in the budget. That being said, and then I would like to take you to the budget appropriation. And the budget appropriation is essentially is the same presentation. The numbers did not change. We just, rather than giving you the detail, this is a summary schedule I talked about earlier. It really just shows the different taxes rolled up, so the different funding sources and the different expenditures by department. So with that, if you turn to the general fund, and I'm looking at this schedule right here.
They all look alike.
It says, the top page says revenue, taxes, permits.
Is your page number on the bottom?
Is it in our blue folders, or is this this is old, this from before?
This should be,
It's right here on the front page, guys.
Yeah.
The very first page. under that item. Item C, go past the special meeting part.
General funds? 11?
Okay, perfect.
So spend a little bit of time. The revenue, total revenue for the general fund is projected to be at $40,300,000. And that's at the bottom, or actually at the top of page 2. Last year's budget was at 28.2 million, which was an increase overall of $2 million. And if you look at page 1, you'll see that the primary increase of that $2 million is $1 million in the taxes, and then the other revenues of 1 million, of which you'll see the different charges for services, judgments, interest, rents, transfers from enterprise funds, which is the primary increase of $993,000 in that category, and no use of fund balance, which is, I like to point out, a policy that we've been trying to live by for the last 4 years anyway, where you do not use one-time revenue sources for ongoing expenditures. And if you do that, it needs to be done eyes wide open and
Right.
with understanding, which will go dovetail into our fund balance conversation next week. So that is the overview of your revenues for the general fund. I'm not going to go department by department, but you'll see each department has wages, benefits, and then operating expenditures. It's done that way. Just spend a little bit of time on this, forgive me, but these are the legal boundaries to which finance can disperse funds. So wages cannot be used for benefits, and vice versa. Benefits cannot be used for back to you in that form of a supplemental budget transfer request that you all approve to move money from one bucket to another. So in the future, you'll see that we make requests of this sort a few times a year to move money from one category to another. That being said, this money for fiscal year 22 appropriation cannot be used for other years' appropriations, i.e. fiscal year 21, and that's the same policy. Once the books are closed, if a prior year invoice is submitted, we cannot use a current year appropriation for a prior year bill. It has to be the same year because that's the legal authority by which we operate.
Can I ask a quick question, Madam Mayor? Under library, on page 9 of 11, I see an increase of $19,000. Is that a part-time? Did we put the part-time employee there? I know the library had asked for part-time, but when I didn't hear that when you mentioned them.
Madam Mayor, if I may, we actually converted a part-time to full-time position current year to get ahead of it. And then we also were bringing over a JAG grant and a rec leader. So essentially the difference, it was a conversion from part-time to full-time.
Okay, because I didn't hear that when you had mentioned what positions were filled, but I saw the increase, so I didn't know.
Because it was in current year. We did it now. We did a reclass now.
You did a reclass now? Okay, thank you.
So with that, I'm just going to go to the bottom of the report at page 11. So the total expenditures for the general fund, wages, that's again classified wages, benefits, and operating expenditures totals $40,298,000 for a increase of $2 million, $2.1 million over last year. And essentially provides the general fund a $2,000 surplus at the end of the year.
Whew. Just squeaked in there.
Just squeaked in.
Just squeaked in.
Thank you.
Yes. So moving on to Fund 103. Under community development, permit fees and total, their local receipts decreased by about projected over budget was $115,000. You'll see wages, benefits, and then operating expenditures totaling $1,007,000, leaving a net revenue of $89,900.
Is that our fund balance?
Our fund balance,
How much?
that will increase our fund
Oh,
balance.
yeah, okay, thank you.
89,000. If everything else is equal, that will fall to fund balance. The beach fund, revenues are projected to be at $4.2 million, which is a $500,000 increase. And expenditures are projected to be at, let's see here, page 4 of 4, 3,000,009. So, excuse me, a net surplus. I'm sorry. Each fund, 4,200,000 in revenues and a total of 3.9 in expenditures. Yeah.
Excuse me, Juan, under pool, and it says wages, benefits for 8071 pool. The pool's closed. Who is that?
Let's see here.
Under beach fund, page 2 of 4 on beach fund.
There are some.
I can answer that if you'd like me to jump in.
Well, hi.
Hi, Lauren Bennett, Director of Leisure Services. For the record, that's a small portion of my salary, our Chief of Ocean Rescue and our Aquatics Manager. They hit the pool fund before it closed, and we just continued to keep it distributed like that.
Okay, okay. So as long as it's not running in a horrible negative.
And moving on to the code remediation. Very straightforward fund, $364,000 projected revenue, which is a $5,000 decrease over last year, with a $313,000 expenditure in operating, with a net revenue of $51,000. Let's see here. 60. Okay, Fund 510, which is on. We have the.
That golf course?
Let's see here.
Related, but yeah.
Code remediation. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, golf course. Sources of funds, $1.4 million, which is a $200,000 increase over the previous year. And expenditures totaling $1.4 million, which gives us a net revenue of about $44,000. information technology. And I should say this is a internal service fund, so all the different enterprise fund, general fund, all pay for their services based on an allocation, which the IT department evaluates. And you'll see all the contributions from each fund. And you'll see that the fund activities or revenues increased by $339,000. And then you'll see that the operating expenditures total $2.4 million with a net income of $125,000. Now moving on to the electric fund. This is very riveting for everyone.
Fascinating.
But out of transparency, I just like to go through this with everybody. Let's see that total sources of funds total approximately $62 million, which is actually a decrease over the prior year of about $380,000. The primary decrease is reflected in the fees and charges. From there, the uses of funds, you'll see it by different departments. Go to 404. The total expenditures, $60,416,000, which is a increase of about $2.8 million, but still leaves a fund balance, projected fund balance of $1.5 million.
Material management warehouse didn't have a category in 2021?
No,
What is, can you explain that?
well, I'll fill
If
in.
I may, I'm Ed Liberty, Electric Utility Director. I'll jump in. We did have an operation there. It was buried within the transmission and distribution function. And what we did is we broke it out on its own. So the cost went down in T&D, and then we created a new warehouse division.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And on fines and charges, if we're looking at increasing rates, why would we think our fees and charges are going to go down $500,000 on the first page under revenue?
Well, those are typically fees and charges associated with late payments and things like that. We don't want to count too much on fees and fines coming in, but that's effectively what that is.
So fees and charges, isn't that like, I mean, it's $61 million, isn't that our electric? That you're saying, so you were calculating $500,000 in late fees that you brought it back out?
Well, okay, let me look at this closer. The fees and charges includes all revenues, right?
Right.
And all fees that we collect from customers. And what you're seeing is like we're planning on having gone down by $500,000. So versus the prior year budget. So we didn't come close to the prior year budget. We actually missed the prior year budget for revenues. And what you're seeing is that we adjusted the next budget back down lower, closer to expectations based on where we see the actual coming in for 21. So what you're not seeing here is what we expect to come in for 21. What you're seeing is the budget for 21. We're expecting to come in well below that budget. So we took the 22 number and lowered that expectation somewhat from the 21 budget, closer to where we've actually come in 21.
Okay.
But not all the way down. We're still planning on seeing some increase in actual 21 when we get into actual 22.
Okay.
But not as high as the 21 budget was at.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, is it time? Do we have any cards, Madam Clerk?
Oh, we're still.
Or we're still going through?
We do not, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Keep this. Okay, so it.
We're on water now, please.
All right. Water fund is projected to have surplus approximately $3.2 million. Page 404, total expenditures are $13 million, $13.7 million, and total revenues are approximately $17 million.
I don't have first page for water revenue. I only have water budget and it goes into the expenses, use of the actual income. Does anybody else?
It starts at 204.
Yeah, I have 2 or 4 on 1 or 4 either. Under water
I
budget.
have come back 2.
We'll make copies, we'll come back.
Okay, sorry.
Looks like the same thing
All our
happens.
books do the same.
It looks like the same thing with the sewer fund. It goes from 404 to 203,
In sewer.
Yeah,
and stormwater just is only 202. And refuse. It seems like they're all missing.
yeah, you're right, refuses as well.
104. We'll come back.
A couple of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Water, stormwater, garage. Like we'll do page 1 for some reason, that come.
My apologies.
Insurance garage fund 2, there's nothing. Garage fund starts with page 2. Self-insurance only has 1 page.
If I can do this, then this may have been easier all along. Then we'll come back. If you turn to your first page, there's a nice little summary. Go through all the different.
A summary.
For my best friend in high school.
Oh, after this.
It's your top page before all the others. Commissioner? Okay, I probably should have just worked from this from the get-go. Okay, so the electric fund, we walked through, the water fund, we just finished. We'll come back and we'll insert all the revenue amounts for all the different funds. Local sewer, you're at a $10 million revenues, no use of fund balance, salaries of 1.1, benefits of 600, salaries plus benefits of 1.77, with total operating of 8.3, with total uses of $10 million, and net income of $27,000. The golf fund we already discussed. Stormwater fund, $2 million of $2,073,000 of projected revenue, with a total of uses of funds of $2,004,000, with projected revenue, net revenues of $70,000. The garage fund, again, which is another internal service fund, which captures not just the cost of operating the vehicles, it also provides for future capitalization, future purchases, which I was not here when this program was developed, but the concept of putting money aside for future acquisitions, car purchases is good, because it's really an annual expense. Now, you may argue, do we need all the different vehicles? That's a different conversation, but including future costs into your current, it's a good discipline. So with that, total sources of funds, approximately $895,000. Total uses, $175,000. We're going recommended $182,000 of fund balance for some of those, for that capital that is being bought. So you are using one-time revenues that you've already collected for future, for capital expenses, so to speak. Refuse fund, $6.7 million in revenues, 6.3 in total uses, with a net revenues of $367,000. IT fund we discussed. Self-insurance fund, this is basically insurance. The self-insurance is general operating liability insurance, $3.1 million and versus $3.1 million. So a whopping 1,700 net. And so will be one of those areas that when we're talking about the 25% fund balance criteria, this is where we would expand anything for storms and those types of activities. Along with if we get to 180 days in surplus with the enterprise funds, 180 days would theoretically cover those unforeseen emergencies also. The utility conservation fund.
I had a question on the self-insurance.
Mayor.
Fine. I think can we take a 10-minute break?
Thanks. Yeah. Want to get a cup of coffee?
10-minute break. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I appreciate it.
I'll go see, make sure that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, while you guys are getting your copies together. Thank you. Where do you want your copy?
Keith, the commission's back. Madam Mayor, it's 6:40 and we're live. Can you unmute yourselves?
Good evening, everyone. Not that this isn't fascinating, but I am feeling under the weather, and I'm going to pass the gavel to the Vice Mayor, Herman Robinson, and listen from home. Thank you very much. I'll see you all tomorrow or sometime. Thank you.
Take care.
Feel better.
Take care. Make better.
Thank you. Well,
Do well. Go. Yeah.
Go rest.
take care of yourself.
Rest up.
Oh, Bruce, do you want to continue?
Yes, sir.
We're,
Office. Thanks.
Madam Clerk, do we have to re-adjourn or?
No, I opened.
No,
the-
you're good. You have the gavel and you have
All
a
right.
quorum and you can just continue.
Okay, so we were on the self-insurance fund, which is basically general liability. And explaining that this would be the fund that, for governmental funds anyway, it would be the go-to if there were significant damages. So this is something that we have to build up over time. The utilities, there are two options. First, we need to build fund balances up to the 180 day, or working capital, I should say, up to 180 days. In theory, that should be sufficient to cover major issues in the disaster recovery. But after discussion with the utility directors, there may be a conversation to increase that reserve a little bit more for those events. But that will be a conversation as we move forward. But the first step is getting the ratios up to 180 days. If we can reach that, then we can go to the next steps.
Part of those policies you're putting forward, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Is there any information on the increase of our self-inflicted claims?
Self-inflicted.
Well, and when you say events, I understand, but when we have suits and have accidents on our own, is that increasing? Is there any way to get a handle on that in terms of?
Well, Lauren Sladen is the HR director. She oversees the self-insurance pool, which would, and she would have a much better familiarity with those activities than I would. So I would defer that question to her. I don't know if she's on.
Well, we can, if I may.
Please, I'm interested in whether we can affect our budget by not having less accidents and less lawsuits.
In theory, yes, obviously, but we can also I can get Lauren to work on providing a report year to year over and how it's changed from year to year. But obviously we're always striving for safety, especially where it's controllable. And I know we're familiar with some sidewalk hazards and things that we've had to settle before. So we can definitely have that report pulled. And as we pursue to make those improvements and reduce the number of hazards and liabilities out there, hopefully there's a subsequent reduction on the budget side as what you're referring to.
So those lawsuits come out of that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, the self-insurance. So we don't, that's like if somebody, like you said, the sidewalk, that's where that comes out of. It doesn't come out of an insurance policy.
No,
Okay.
we're self-insured
Self-insured.
for all those activities. So we work with a claims specialist
Okay.
who provide us, coverage amounts that we should have when our physical inventory buildings, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And based on experience ratings, how much we should have for the trips and the potholes.
Okay, perfect.
So it's not like we're pulling numbers out of the air.
No, I mean, it's funny because maybe people who are listening don't realize it. We we insure ourselves. We don't have like Allstate where, they're not just going to write a check. It's literally coming out of the taxpayers' pockets, essentially.
But, and which I also should say, just for color, it's a common practice for municipalities to have their own self-insurance programs. So it's not uncommon. Let's see here, the benefit fund, this is where our health insurance is. So again, this is a area that we have to really focus on year over year, because there can be spikes in activity and you have to have sufficient fund balances to absorb any type of unforeseen expenses or claims. And customarily what happens is if you collect too much over a period of years, not 1 year, but over a period of years, what you can do is if you have a theoretical 10% increase and you have sufficient fund balance, you can decrease that to 8% or whatever the appropriate amount is. But we don't have that luxury yet. So we're still trying to build fund balance. And the last is the regional sewer. This is different than the local sewer. And that the city is part of a regional program, which sewer / water department operate. And this is the activity associated with it. Authority. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to roll back time for a moment. It was brought to my attention that we did not include the rollback amounts associated with the tax levy, and that we read that into the record.
Item A.
So with item A, okay, let's see here. The MSTU millage rate is 3.4581. The maximum level of operating millage cannot exceed 6.5. The tentative millage rate is 5.4945 mils per 1,000 of assessed valuation, which is 8.2% more than the rollback rate of 5.0754.
And these are all within line of matching communities.
No, it's
I
not.
want to say it's matching communities. It's within the permissible boundaries of the tax levy per state. So we're compliant with the rate. What is the conversation that the commissioner brought up is, it's worthy of discussion that we move forward to try to decrease the tax rate or the tax levy to provide a more attractive rate to potential homeowners. But quite frankly, the problem is that you've been on the as a commissioner for a while. There's never been enough room to go back into a rollback rate.
Right.
And, so there's pros. You're building a cushion for future years if you go back to a rollback rate year over year. But then probably what comes with that is a decrease in your operating or an increase in your chargebacks or something to absorb that decrease in revenue. So it should be a lively conversation.
Well, because, our goal is to get more people to move to Lake Worth and to buy homes here. And if we're really focusing on affordable home ownership, and, again, this is why it's a conversation for our strategic plan and our visioning session for next year is how do we, get ourselves on the map for more people to want to move here? We can't be the highest in taxes, the highest in utilities. And I want to offer the most services, become, not the lowest in taxes or utilities, but at least be comparable to our surrounding neighbors. And right now, of course, that's why I said, because of the great policies you guys are putting in place, we can actually have this conversation and hope that, we'll get more people to go on the tax roll, which will offset, hopefully, decreasing that in the future. But it's a great conversation to be had.
Ed, if I might,
Chris,
Assistant Mayor,
Go ahead.
I just, thank you. I just want to correct one thing from Commissioner Malega, that she mentioned that we don't want to be more expensive than our neighbors on electric rates. And as we are all well aware, we are not. We are at this point on par with our neighbors on electric rates. So we shouldn't let that message be out there. I certainly hear the message on, and the concern, I've had it for a while too, that our millage rate is a bit higher than other places. I think I'm also hearing very clearly from Finance Director Miller that it would be nice to lower them, but we are not providing any excessive services at this point. We're fairly bare bones. So if we want to lower them, we're going to have to come up with an alternate source of funding.
And I'm going to question the appraisal, the way appraisals are done in Lake Worth in terms of taxation. That's, we try to provide equity, equality,
Appreciate you.
fairness.
If you want to put one there, we'll throw it out.
City manager.
Yeah, Commissioner Robinson, if I may, I'd like to request that we reopen the hearing on item A, which is what we just kind of read, just so that the record is correctly read. So we need to go through the whole process, reread it into the record correctly, and then take the motion. Our attorney would be happy if we just redid the item and read it in the record correctly. But this time, if you could, Mr. Mueller.
Hang on, we're still in the middle of C, so don't we need to vote on that first?
Oh, we already went back to
No,
A.
we've already went back to A. I just need to officially reopen A, and then we can go back and jump back into C, which will have probably much more conversation.
All right, so I'm going to say, Bruce, are you finished with your presentation for resolution 58, 2021?
With the millage rate?
Yes.
Yes.
So now I ask for a motion to approve.
Vice Mayor Robinson, this is Christy Gatto. But, what we need to do by, good evening. What we need to do by statute is make sure that we announce the millage rate and the percentage of a rollback. By statute, we have to announce the percentage over rollback for the current millage rate, and that wasn't done in the first reading of this item. So that's what we need to make sure that it's announced publicly.
I'm going to leave that up to Bruce to announce that. Or staff.
Give me one moment, sir.
And so in the conversation, perception is very important. And so we're going to get it right.
Okay. So again, what I read, Chrissy, I don't know if you heard me, but I started, I'll just reread it again.
Read the bottom.
Yeah, I am.
From there.
The county fire MSCU millage rate is 3.4581. The city's maximum available operating millage cannot exceed 6.5419 mils. The tentative millage is 5.4945 mils or 5.4945 per 1,000 of assessed valuation, which is 8.27% more than the rollback rate of 5.0754 mils.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Motion
So,
to approve.
and the second?
Second.
Second.
Second, we've got a second.
I'm
All those
sorry,
in favor?
Vice Mayor, who made the motion the second time?
Sarah. Commissioner Malega?
Commissioner Lega, and who seconded it? I'm sorry.
Commissioner Stokes made the motion and Commissioner Malega seconded it.
Okay, and we're back on the millage resolution.
Right.
Although we voted on that,
All in favor?
Vote again.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Resolution 58-2021 is done.
Correct.
Thank
My apologies for the confusion.
No, we
Now,
need to,
back to item C.
we need to stay
Okay.
within the law.
C, unless there's any questions about the operating, I would like to move on to the capital.
I have, well,
Yes.
if you don't mind, it can happen now or at the end, I don't mind, but I just wanted to have an opportunity, have a brief discussion with my peers about the additional staffing that we're allocating funds for, because we're proposing funding for mid-year positions. So I'd just like to have a conversation about that at some point.
Thank you.
I would recommend now
Okay,
All right.
to keep.
to keep them separate.
Yeah.
So your comments?
I feel a little nervous about funding 4 positions. We're at a break-even budget. So with this, it's only funding half of a year of 4 different salaries and benefits. But the next year, we're gonna have to fund 100%. So, we didn't have a chance to discuss this. It's my understanding that we can maybe decrease our budget for tonight. And then if we want to add these mid-year positions back in a couple months, we can do a supplemental budget where we have more time to talk about, what does a communication specialist do? And, I'm just nervous about having 4 positions that are only being funded for half the year.
And I think that, I think when we asked this question before, the reason it's mid-funded is because by the time we pass the budget and they do the job applications, they do the background checks, that we're already 4 or 5 months into the budget that hasn't been spent for that salary. Am I correct, city manager?
That's correct.
So even though it's halfway, it's going to take us 4 or 5 months just to fill those positions. So we're not paying that salary for 4 or 5 months.
So then the next year, we have to pay for the entire year. So we're starting the next year's budget in the hole.
Yes, exactly. And I agree with that concern. And I think we all are conscious that there's probably not a very negotiable need in the finance department for some extra staff. I think we've seen the evidence of that. However, adding an assistant director in recreation, yes, I understand it's only a half-year commitment now, but you can't tell the person, well, we're only going to pay you a half year for the next year. It's a full year commitment for that one. So it is a de facto substantial year-round budget increase. And I have a concern about that.
I have a concern as well I have an interest in outsourcing, maybe. I don't know if we've even looked at outsourcing in this term. And my other concern is hiring without a city manager who is going to be responsible for next year's budget.
City manager is not responsible for the budget. We are. So.
But the hiring is the city manager's job.
And
Right.
I hear all of you very loud and clear. I will say that I know that we need somebody for leisure services. That department is extremely overstretched. We keep adding more things to it. Like now we have the street painting festival, which is a great opportunity for us, but we don't have the staff to fulfill a street painting festival, which is an all around year calendar planning event itself. And hopefully we'll be able to get some of the ARPA money to pay for the grant writer and some of these other positions. And we also have funding coming in through the ARPA money from what we've already spent on above over salary positions and overtime that we already spent out. We're going to get that funding back. Am I correct, CM? The money that we spent through ARPA?
There's an unrestricted pot of money from ARPA that we'll take a look at and we'll roll forward to figure out how to invest that.
But I'm saying that there's also a portion where I thought we could repay ourselves back for all the overtime that was spent and allocate it from the previous year that we spent out of our payroll.
Related to COVID.
Correct.
Correct.
Which is a huge chunk of money for that department in and of itself.
Which is considered a one-time bucket that we usually try not to have continual expenses come out of, right, reoccurring.
Correct.
I think if we're planning on using some ARPA money for the grant specialists, then the grant specialist funding should be pulled out of this budget and be part of that conversation. Rather than assuming, that it will be ARPA. I even have it here, ARPA, question mark. The grant specialist, can that be funded through ARPA? Because hopefully it can. So that I don't think it should be part of the budget we passed tonight necessarily. If that's what we're planning on trying to do. And if not, we can come back in 2 months, if we have a permanent city manager, and we can do a supplemental budget hearing, as my understanding, Bruce.
Yeah, so your point is valid, but the supplemental, bringing it around again for a supplemental change
Staff time.
is, well, we really haven't had this open and frank discussion in the public about communication or the true focus of leisure services in terms of events versus other activities that leisure services does. They do a tremendous a lot,
And I would add to that we haven't had the kind of visioning that Commissioner Robinson is referring to. And so if somebody says, well, we need X in X department, I would submit that we also need Y in a number of other areas. And one specific one that I would mention is with our utility as a municipal utility and one of our largest funds and also a substantial contributor to the general fund, we very likely are going to be interested at some point in the green bond market. It's a separate market than the straight bond market. It's a market of folks who are eager to loan money that has an environmental commitment in it. It's not just an environmental, yeah, we're going to do something. It's very strict commitments to do something. We'll loan you the money if you're doing things that are going the right direction. To do that, we have to establish a track record. So we need to have some things that we can point to. Well, we have a sustainability director, or we have a sustainability coordinator, or we have things in our code that make a strong commitment to actual things, or we have strong programs in our utility for energy efficiency or rebates or new technology. And at this point, we wouldn't be able, as far as I can tell, to tap into that money. And there are people eager to loan it, and probably at pretty decent rates. But we have to make some commitments shown up in our budget and our policies. And that's I think, a very different class of need than we need to do, that we're overworked in a given department. All the departments are probably overworked.
With all due respect, Lauren Bennett is our leisure services director, is the only female director, and she's also the only director who doesn't have an assistant. She handles the golf fund, parking, beach, all of the parks, and all the programs. And she has a very limited staff that we also ask to work on the weekends and after hours. So that position for me is a non-negotiable for her having a director. If not, what's going to happen? We're going to end up losing her and half of her team because they are overworked, they were exhausted, and they need help. Do you know how much work just the street painting festival, again, is putting on their lap?
These are very valid working condition concerns, and I hear you on the female director and no assistant. And I think that's a valid concern. However, if we're thinking of borrowing,
Who said we're borrowing money?
It's on the plan for the electric utility.
No, we are not. I'm talking about this position. We're talking about positions. We're not talking about electric utility.
Well, you didn't hear, I guess, what I said, or I didn't explain myself clearly, that if we have any inclination that we might need to tap into some of that kind of money, we need to take the steps now to establish our credentials that we are in fact seriously committed to those things. They are not going to care what kind of recreation department we have. That's not going to tap into funds that we are very likely to need. we already on the books of looking for, you saw it in the Stantec analysis, $80 million of borrowed funds. If we can borrow those more thoughtfully with a green bond program and have some commitment to access that, I think that's going to help us out financially.
Commissioner Stokes?
So
This is a product of us not having a chance to dig in deep to the different departments and areas of here and have more conversations like this right now. But I'm wondering because I really do understand the burden. And when I was talking to Lauren Bennett the other day as well, that the street painting festival is putting on our team
Huge.
is one person that a $40,000 position, is that going to be their only job every year, is just managing that? Is there some other possible partnership that we can enter into? I mean, I feel like when it comes to the street painting festival, that is like a beast. And I don't want to just hurry up and be like, we're going to add a new permanent staff position. We haven't discussed, I don't know how much your office is, it's just a commitment. And we have had a chance to know how all these, communications, special events, and assistant leisure services are all connected.
And lifeguards and golf and parking and golf course are all.
Right. So, but the three of the, I'm taking the accountants aside because we need them and they serve everybody in the city, but 3 of the 4 new positions are all kind of from the same department. And like I said, I'm just worried that we're funding them for half the year, and I don't want to beef up this department. You said, is there any outsourcing we can do? Are there any other partnerships we can do to relieve that pressure from Lauren? I definitely want to relieve that pressure from Lauren, but I don't want to overcommit.
And
maybe
Commissioner,
there are grant opportunities that could be looked at also.
Good.
All right, let me try to unpack all of this, and we'll start with the biggest position and work backwards. The Assistant Leisure Services Director is a position that the city has been considering probably for the better part of 7 or 8 years since the creation of Leisure Services Department. The department, to Commissioner Maliga's point, is probably the second or third largest department in the city. Okay, and it varies widely in different divisions. And Lauren, just for the record, is one of several female directors that we have. But beyond that, there's no succession planning in leisure services. Every department across the board has a deputy director. And it's important to have a high level, you're staring at someone who was brought along for that moment that eventually happens everywhere. And it's smart planning to have a department that large that means so much to the city, because some of the divisions that you left out, Commissioner, was special events in itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mentioned
that includes parades. We added street painting. We added block parties. We added another multicultural festival, the 4th of July's, the constant social media, the constant communication stuff. It's nonstop. Every time that there's a request, whether it's a workshop or spin up a public meeting over at the bar room, all these things happen through Lauren Bennett, Ben Kerr, Emmerich, and Alyssa. Okay, and every time that Lauren Bennett, as our director, has to stop and pivot and go deal with a Zoom workshop or whatever it might be, it's time that she's taking away from trying to lead, okay, the other 8 divisions as well. We want to talk about wearing multiple hats. We all wear multiple hats. At the end of the day, along the way, looking back in the rear view, we've made decisions along the way to shore up our departments and not to have ourselves where all the institutional knowledge of how a department runs goes out the door to one employee. You're playing with fire when you do that. Okay. Secondly, the special events specialist is an existing position that was fully funded pre-pandemic. When the pandemic hit us and we got away from events, we got away from the ballroom function. So don't forget, it's not just about events. We have a full-fledged wedding renting venue that currently is being overseen by 2 people who are also the same 2 people who run a full-fledged over 300 event days we host in the city. There's only 350 some odd days on the calendar. So this is about trying to meet level of service with level of expectations. And amongst all the other things that are listed. Okay, so the special event specialist is a prior position. Now that we're back open, now that the demands for this event, this wedding, that wedding, oh, we need to promote the regional beach. It's a regional destination. Well, guess who makes that happen? And if there's ability to outsource functions like sponsorship, raising, and things of that sort, that's exactly what Lauren Bennett's spending her time trying to figure out, how to offset the cost of a street painting festival that's upwards of $300,000. And while we talk about potentially reducing the millage rate next year,
All right, well, that's a different conversation.
No,
it all plays in.
no doubt.
Okay, it all plays in.
Right, but we're
Because
not
as
talking about
pressure
the
comes
numbers
in
tonight.
to do more, you gotta have staff to do the more.
No doubt. You know.
If you want to eliminate position, eliminate the communication specialist one.
I want a truly balanced budget. So if we think the assistant leisure service director is like the number one absolute must have, I want to fund it for the full year, knowing that that's a position we're going to have next year and the future years. So that's a $90,000 position. If we cut communications and special events, that's $100,000. That makes up, or one of them. Okay, communication specialist. Will that make up for the shortfall? We can always
It's
add.
90 plus benefits.
We can
It's
always-
90,000 plus benefits, and it'll fall to attrition because we won't find somebody till January.
We can always do a supplemental budget and add more back end. I don't want to rush through this tonight and assign, and once we pass this for all these positions, we cannot go back. And it's not funded.
Exactly. And I think that's a very big point. And yes, I hear the assistant city manager on the needs in the recreation department and that we have shortfall of staff. But there are other areas of the city, particularly environmental ones, where we do nothing at this point. We do zero. So the shortfall in staff there is much greater.
Oh, it's not.
Vice Mayor, would
and-
I be able to say just a few words if that's okay?
Good.
I just kind of wanted to reiterate with what Juan said is the ask keeps growing and the staff numbers do not. So at some point, I'm going to have to come before you to say, there's only 3 of us in communications. There's only 3 of us in special events. And that's counting myself twice. At some point, it's going to reach the boiling point. I'm going to have to just say, I can't do it, or you're going to have to peel back the layer of expectations because our team started with COVID and we haven't stopped. I think a lot of people tend to forget that. A lot of departments were able to go back to daily operations, whereas leisure services is still dealing with COVID and the output of communications and how to run businesses safely with COVID. So we're kind of getting double whammied as far as daily operations, pandemic, output, lack of staff. So I just want to say it publicly, like at some point, I'm going to have to come to you and say, like, I'm really sorry, I cannot do that. So I just wanted to let you guys know, like, it's really reaching a boiling point for staff, myself included.
No doubt. We're here to support you, but I think maybe we do need to look at outsourcing some of the specific, I mean, the weddings, I'm not sure whether that's an efficient way to use staff and based on the income of the second floor is another leisure services challenge. And you know, you have, I'm going to say you have a tremendous amount of responsibilities that could be more efficiently distributed. I'm okay with moving forward. I don't know. I honestly, everybody appreciates leisure services for the work they do. I'm going to say that a lot of their setup and their labor is, I'm going to question whether we could get that done in a cheaper fashion. than having our more professional people involved in straight out labor for their events. And I don't want to get into the operations of leisure services or anything else. Can we accept the fact that we're going to balance the budget? We're going to the responsibility of having the street painting festival is I'm going to say paramount. So whatever it takes, and the street painting festival is going to happen within 6 months. Can we can, like Bruce said, we can always adjust the budget later. Can we agree to move on? Well, Commissioner Malega and then McVoy.
I agree with you, Vice Mayor. I mean, we've had this in front of us for weeks about these positions. This is not just thrown at us. This conversation is just happening out in the public, but we've known. Again, this brings me back to, I'm looking at our budget, and under the general fund on page 8 of 11, our operating expenses for 2 cemeteries that don't create any money are literally a cinder block around our ankle. We're looking at almost $500,000 in expenses for something that doesn't produce money. And yet we're sitting here talking about cutting $40,000 and $50,000 jobs out of much needed anticipated expenses that we need to do to make the city better. So this is a great conversation. And I love the fact that Commissioner Stokes brought it forward. I have complete confidence in the fact that we can reassess our budget needs, but these are positions that need to be filled. I would much rather come back and circle around and say, how do I get rid of this expense of the cemeteries to offset $500,000 to help pay for the things that we need in the city, the much needed positions that we need. So yes, I agree with you. I'm for moving forward with the first hearing and knowing that we will find the funding. Again, the ARPA money's there, and we're probably not even going to have these positions filled until January to March.
Commissioner McVoy.
Thank you. I think it's a distraction a little for us to focus on that these are half-year positions. As Commissioner Stokes very accurately pointed out, that's a temporary phenomenon for this year. Unless there's a commitment to make those positions half-year for next year and every year out, we are really hiring 3 full-time positions in one department. That is a very big increase, and the only other department that we're increasing in is in accounting and finance, where it's pretty clear there's a need for some more staff there. Glamorous or not glamorous, but it needs to be done. We have other needs in the city, and I hear what Director Bennett said, and I understand that she has a lot of work. I think there are discussions down the pike, and I think Commissioner Robinson alluded to them, that we maybe need to reevaluate a bit what things we do in recreation, and rather than committing ourselves to 3 additional full-time positions, which is a big commitment, and it's a commitment from there going forward. Unless somebody is willing to make these a temporary position for half a year and no more, I'm not comfortable with that.
Are you comfortable with only half a year of programs, half a year of events? That's pretty much essentially what you're asking for.
Commissioner Stokes.
I'm going to make a suggestion that I think we should anticipate that we will be covering the entire cost of the Assistant Leisure Service Director, and we know how important our special events are to us. We fund those properly, and we pull the grant specialists and communication specialists out, hoping that our outreach dollars through ARPA can really help us develop a strong communications effort, and maybe we'll get a permanent position out of whatever that outreach effort leads to, along with the grant specialists. So if we pull the grant specialists and the communication specialists, with the expectation that ARPA will be able to be used for outreach and grant writing, then we have enough room in our budget to cover the special events specialist. It is hard to say, Bruce. Special events specialist. And the assistant director. And hopefully that will be a big enough commitment and a big enough boost to help that department get through the street painting festival. And I really do think I think we need to have a big conversation, and I think ARPA will help us with the kind of communication we want to do in this community. So I'm fine pulling that and waiting. Nobody ever said that we have two things on here that say not funded, removed from the budget. I was never suggesting that we take these off and throw them in the garbage can, but that we wait until we see what we can afford to fund. I don't feel comfortable funding positions. So my suggestion is to wait on the grant specialist and communication specialist to move forward with the rest.
Is that a motion?
It is a motion to decrease the budget by,
Would you consider doing the grant specialists for 6 months, since we need grant specialists to help write funding for all the grants that we're trying to apply for right now, which would include some of the ARPA money?
Or can we outsource, instead of hiring? I mean, that's a question.
do we know if ARPA money can be used for a grant specialist
We don't know
or
yet.
for grant writing or a
If it's
position?
related to an ARPA qualifying project, there's probably a way to get the payroll piece of it reimbursed.
But if it's going into that bucket of the funding that there's that one bucket where if we put it in this little bucket, we can use it for whatever we need, i.e. grant specialists. I forgot what that bucket is right now, the title of it. Which is basically general funds for the city to run.
Right,
Then we could obviously pay for the grant specialist out of that funding,
right.
correct?
And that's been the plan all along. So
But even though it's
Well,
not in writing, it's because we haven't had the budget workshop, I'm assuming.
The ARPA workshop, I would just like to do, things in a row. So we'll fund what we can fund right now. As soon as we have the conversation about the money that we can repay ourselves back through ARPA, we can then allocate that money for a grant specialist.
Okay, so
it's a good compromise, guys, because at the end of the day, even though we're applying for grants, it takes us months to get these things advertised, job descriptions, get them posted, go through the hiring process. It takes time. So, with Commissioner Stokes, I'm not a commissioner, it's a good compromise. It gives us a lot of what we need immediately. And, whether we change the budget, fund it 100%, 10-1, it's still going to take us, January, and that stuff falls to attrition. So, but the point is on the sheet, you see the full cost all in, which I think is the point you're trying to
And it will
make.
be funded the next year. So that extra half year savings will be like an extra little surprise, but we're not going to be digging ourselves into a hole for, so when we get our increase next year and we say, what do we want to spend this new increase on? And we're like, well, we have to pay back these other unfunded positions.
At the end of the day, and it is my last comment, Mr. Moak, I think this is a good exercise and a good conversation for you as an elected body to start to see the impacts of a level of expectation where it doesn't meet the level of service. Okay, when I talk about level of service is the people to actually do the job. And it's very easy for the level of expectations to kind of outpace what we're capable of doing and what the pandemic has done because of COVID protocol. As you see from time to time, when you guys stop by the office, 8 guys are out, 4 people are out, we're down 3 trucks on refuse because they got people sitting either out because of COVID or because of COVID protocol, which puts you on, into quarantine. There's a lot of disruptive things out there beyond just the normal level of expectations. I got big emails today about the condition of our downtown. Well, all my downtown debris specialist guys are all out dealing with COVID. So again, smart budgeting. This department's growing, not in size and sheer FTEs, but it's growing in the amount of expectation placed upon it. And while we're at it, it's an award-winning special events function. And special events, if you look at the tourism master plan, I can promise you in your vision and strategic planning, now and later, special events and being a special events town is always in the top 3 things of what we're known for, what we want to be.
And they just got
Events.
9 awards 2 weeks ago in Orlando.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Yeah, we love them. We love all the events.
then we have to show that we love them and find the money to figure it out to put it in the budget.
We do need to find the money, but right now I want to make sure that we have a budget. I don't feel, like I said, I don't feel comfortable with doing this half year positions
Understood.
for positions that are going to roll over from year to year.
So,
And I would add that it's great that we are getting awards for recreational events and recreational programs. It's a good thing. I do agree with with Assistant Manager's comment on expectations and funding. It's not reasonable to have unfunded mandates. However, this is also a community that has repeatedly expressed very high environmental expectations, and we fall, generally speaking, quite short. We do not have anybody who's dedicated to making sure that we are starting to win awards in that area. And that's something that a lot of residents do care about. And it is also something that potentially positions us to increase our value as a city, increase the kinds of businesses that want to be here, increase potential for outside funding, increase potential for grant funding. So yes, I hear that there's a shortfall in that department, but there is, I'm repeating myself, there's a zero funding of some things that really should be funded and are funded in our neighbors. If we're worried about comparing to our neighbors, almost every other community has somebody who is in charge of making sure we're pushing ahead on environmental activities.
Separate topic. We're down to numbers tonight. I would love to be award-winning environmental community. I would love to increase the efficiency of leisure services income and expenses. And I recognize that I don't know how they want to split it, but we have a 6 month budget now. It's going to take us 6 months to affect the change in the department. We haven't had a conversation policy-wise as to why we should have so many responsibilities under one department head, both sustainability and leisure services. I think we should have that conversation. Tonight, we need to balance the budget, and if we can, do you want to make a motion on your compromise or?
Yeah, Bruce was gonna help me out to make a motion to decrease the budget by, help me with the numbers, because I don't know if I'm doing it by 125 or half of 100.
What you're doing is you're increasing funding for the Assistant Leisure Services Director to $90,000. You're increasing the you're increasing the special events specialist to $40,000. You're increasing the grant specialist to $65,000 for a full salary or full year.
We don't have, we can't do that, can we? Okay.
You are decreasing the communication specialist by $30,000.
Okay.
You're going to increase ARPA funding for the grant specialist by $30,000. And you're going to allow me to effectuate the increase other revenues by about $2,000. And then you'll have a balanced budget.
By that savings. He's talking about increase by the savings you're proposing.
Okay, and may I just make a motion to vote on what Bruce just said, or do I need to repeat all of that?
No, it's on record.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's your motion.
That's my motion.
According to Bruce's statement.
Yes.
Do we have a second?
And then further.
I'll second that.
Further that, those changes will be reflected on your next public hearing.
For the budget. Any other comments before we vote? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
You get that?
Passes unanimously. Moving on. Bruce.
Some more.
So,
All right. So now I would like to go to the capital budget conversation. So before I get number. A couple of housekeeping things I would like to mention. What you are voting on as the appropriation is the fiscal year 22 rows, if you will. Everything else is a 5-year plan, okay? So which future years from fiscal year 23, 24, 25, and 26, even though they are reflected on the schedule, that's the plan. That's not the appropriation. The only thing that you are appropriating is the fiscal 22 plan.
Budget, yeah.
Okay, that's will be the appropriation. The next thing I would like to mention, and Juan mentioned it earlier in another conversation. There are ways, if you will, to evaluate capital. Okay, all capital is not equal. So I tried to evaluate, and there's criteria, just real quick. If there's a court award, yeah, that's a no-brainer. It has to be funded. Then there's what's called project category. Is it a asset that needs to be replaced because there's endangerment or some other factor? And I think I've shared this with you before, but I'll send it back out to you. And then there's a risk assessment, and then financing. Is it self-financing, i.e. a grant, or do we have to go out and borrow? That kind of stuff. Sustainability and environmental is another category. Does it align with the strategic plan? Is there a cost benefit? And is there a budgetary impact, negative or positive? Does it increase the level of service? Does it consolidate services and make things more effective, operations more effective and more efficient? And then what's the economic impact? If we build this, will it bring in new revenue streams, whatever the case may be? So based on that, each one of these categories have different weights. And then from there, you add up those weights and you get a total score. So based on that, it's easier to identify what is more critical as we go out. Before you and I just want to focus on the fiscal year 22 request for the time being, because again, this is the appropriation, so I'll spend a little bit more time. So the first group is the governmental funds, starting with the general fund. The 22 request is for $150,000 for impact windows. And you can see that that is not funded currently. I highly recommend what I recommended earlier, that we wait and evaluate what we want to do with ARPA funds. If you want to put it in a capital, or you may want to use fund balance. But the conversation is not fund balances, right? And it's recommended, I'm going to say throughout the industry, if you will, that whatever you can use ARPA funds for, we do it. Okay, and keep our powder dry for our own funds, because you can use your own funds for anything you want. Okay, but we have a one-time opportunity here to augment our capital budget in ways that I have never seen before, and maybe after 9/11. There was some after 2008, there was some, but this is a true opportunity, and we're getting direct dollars, not indirect dollars, but direct dollars into the city that we can grow the city, for lack of better words. So I'm not putting anything in these categories in hopes that we can have a conversation shortly hereafter and come up with a strategy relative to ARPA and how we want to use those funds.
And that's the amount is approximately,
The ARPA funds?
yeah.
Yeah, do we have an estimate?
Total is about $19 million, $10
But to pay ourselves back, do we have
million
any?
estimate. $10 million that we can pay ourselves back over 4 years.
Okay.
So then you'll see in the middle of the column, because I think there was some confusion, if you will, lack of better words, as to if you see grant in hand and a grant to apply for. So I'm just trying to designate which is which. You also see pay-go and fund balance. There is an important distinction between pay-go and fund balance. Pay-go is out of your current revenue stream. Fund balance is your debt slipping into your savings account. And that's a one-time expenditure or a one-time, that's a one-time revenue. Okay, so you really, of any of the categories, you really want to make sure that your fund balance allocation is paying attention to pay-go. As much as we can do pay-go without going over and dipping into our new fund balance requirements, as much as you possibly can. That may, we really want to look at that. Transfers from other funds, and sales tax, and then borrowing. And then if it doesn't fit one of those categories, it's not being recommended. So the $150,000 right now of impact of those is not being recommended, okay, for future conversation because it is a life safety, type issue. It rates very high when you do the analysis that I talked about in rating earlier.
Excuse me, Juan, if we do the impact windows, we no longer have to put the black sheathing on the building, correct?
Well, there's still the danger of impact windows from projectiles, but it definitely would help reduce. I don't want to say yes.
Okay, well, I'm thinking because of labor and the employees that we have on little bucket things that have to put all those up, would it help with that?
You don't want me up there. The V store lighting, it was a $50,000 request, and it's in the grant application category. If we don't get the grant, then we'll have another conversation. But right now, it would be funded through a grant. The cemetery conversations, again, put it into the not funded because depending upon the ARPA conversation and all that kind of stuff, we'll go from there. The library had no request for fiscal year 22. Recreation had $826,000 of requests. And you'll see that either it's a grant in hand for the Memorial Park Pavilion, giving us the remaining balance of $327,000 and grants to apply for. So the next conversation relative to where the $327,000 is funded from, that's the conversation we'll have at that point.
Can I ask a question in regards to recreation? Why is it that you never see, the only time we do recreation work, from what I've been looking at the last couple of budgets, is if it's grant or CDBG funds? Is it because we just never have a fund balance left over in that account for recreation?
Well, recreation we did use paying sales tax in the past.
But again, that's not fund balance. Like so the revenues, there's nothing left over in revenues for us to put back into recreation? We always have to wait until we find
Historically,
a pot of money?
Historically, that's been the issue. When there has been available capital fund balance, for instance, it went to things like infrastructure, higher graded life safety things, things like playgrounds, dugouts, some of your recreational elements that are needed. just don't score when you're weighing out, sidewalks and roads or elevator cabs and certain things, so it kind of gets punted. And then with the availability of FERDAP grants out there, and historically, and CDBG's been used for parks and rec improvements as well. It's a classic case again of our needs exceeding our ability to do. So we go worse first. Like for instance, dugouts are important, but does it weigh against, our fuel tanks?
Well, I'm looking at roof replacement. I'm like, the gym that's one of our buildings. How bad is the roof? Do we really need to have this conversation?
But if you flip, roofs will kind of end up, maybe the next year or the next 2 years, depending on the condition, when it shows up. 'Cause remember, it's a 5-year plan.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that the emergency is now, but within 5 years, it's probable that life expectancy of that capital is gonna expire.
So if we've always used grants and CDBG funds, then if we're trying to plan for a roof, then that would mean that we would try to be financially smarter and know that we need to try to have some of that capital in recreation to pay for the roof.
Well, you're bringing up a very important discussion, in my opinion anyway. Deferred maintenance is one of those things that will kill any municipality. And not to be harsh, but Lake Worth Beach is a poster child of deferred maintenance. Unfortunately, it just did not have the means. It's not criticism.
No, correct.
So once we adopted and started doing the 5-year capital plan, and the department head started to identify those critical needs, now we can start layering in the capital conversation with the operating conversation and have a much broader scope and understanding of what our true needs are, rather than just saying, okay, let's run over here and take a look at operating, and then we're going to kick to the side the capital piece, and that's going to come back and haunt you.
Correct.
In spades.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have the mechanism relative to, how to proceed, but it always comes back to funding, and that's why I'm just throwing out that tidbit of as much as we can use ARPA to help, because one of the things that you can do is there's going to be needs that are in the out years that in theory you don't have to wait until that year. You can roll that appropriation forward and take care of that need in fiscal year 22, 23 if the departments can facilitate that work. So, the conversation may say, okay, let's move some of these in the out years into fiscal year 22 and use those ARPA funds once they are received.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
So page 2 of 28, if you turn the page, street maintenance. Right now, the request was for $30,000 for street maintenance. And we're going to use fund balance from refuse and stormwater, because both of those are essentially that's what supports the street sweeping program. The big contract, there's a $42,500 fiscal year 21 and a fiscal year 22 component. And that's going to come out of the refuse fund balance.
And what is that request for?
The mid.
For what?
The bid of $42,000.
Contract for street sweeping.
Yeah.
What is it?
A contract for street sweeping, isn't it?
Incentive program.
It's part of our economic incentive.
Yeah.
Let me chime in if William Waters is on here. William?
How about you?
I know William's on.
We're talking about,
Can you go get that contract? Yeah.
Is it 42.5 for how many years? This is the last year?
Incentive program that was allocated across different funds, and that was the portion for refuse. So refuse, water, electric, and
Sure.
thank you. Those 4 funds contributed to this economic incentive for the developer. So
Okay, you don't need to go with the contract. That's fine.
No, it's, you got pretty creative, huh?
So,
Vice Mayor Robinson, this is Christy Gatto. I'm familiar with the mid contract, and the only outstanding incentive that I'm aware of on the mid is for the utility incentives spread out over 3 years.
Did you hear that from Christy?
Are we sure this isn't for the Bohemian?
sure it's for the mid.
All right, can you go grab it? Because she's saying she doesn't think that there is anything else outstanding. Thank you.
Sorry, I was indisposed. It's William Walters, Community Sustainability Director. The economic development incentive for the mid has not been paid out yet. The developer has been having trouble posting their performance bond. They've asked both Christy and I to look at doing an amendment to their agreement so they would pay out at the end of the 3-year term versus at the beginning. And we are working on that. And so it's likely that that will not pay out until fiscal year 23 versus 22, possibly fiscal year 24. The other.
Is that for the utility?
Yes.
It's not for infrastructure.
Street maintenance?
No, the infrastructure that has been paid, what it's outstanding for infrastructure is for the Bohemian, which I think is $300,000 for East Coast Street.
And can
it's the same developer.
I was just gonna say,
Yes.
and this agreement that you're saying you're talking about, is it gonna have to come before us to approve?
It was already approved as part of the development agreement.
No, I'm talking about this extension on this extension that they're now asking for their bond.
That's part of, it's a 3-year program where we gave them an incentive based on the additional revenue that they would bring into the utilities, electric, water, and sewer. And so what we do is require a bond to ensure that if we pay out those amounts that we anticipate in additional revenue, if they don't hit those revenue marks, we can capture back that amount. And what William's talking about is perhaps amending the agreement so we don't pay out to the end of the 3 years. But I think there might be a disconnect because that's completely a utility incentive program and it has nothing to do with the infrastructure. The infrastructure for the mid is done.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're seeing a line item budget for $42,500 for year 2022 coming out of street maintenance.
And what is that? And are we paying that to the mid or is the mid paying that to us?
They're upstairs getting the contract right now.
All right. It is a $42,000 contract for roadway resurfacing, concrete ADA improvements. And the city agreed to infrastructure improvements to the roadways adjacent to the mid. So those improvements are going to include mill and resurface, curb and sidewalks, and ADA improvements. So essentially it was part of their overall incentive package for the tune of $42,500 for us to go in. Now, that work's already been done, so is this kind of a pay, Jamie?
I mean, that work's been done a year ago, 2 years ago.
Assuming they were going to perform on the revenue.
That's different. That's the utility discussion, but this, they redid 17th Avenue.
I mean, was this just a carryover from last year?
Well, then we have to pay.
It's divided in 2 years.
Then
He just said it was 42,000.
Last year, which my understanding was split in 2 years. One in fiscal year, $42,000 in fiscal year 21, and another 42.
But if it was a total of 42,000, is that what the contract says?
The total was actually 84,000. So it
And-
ended up being split among 2 years, but the total incentive for the mid for the infrastructure portion was $84,000.
So it's split between 2 years, correct?
And it's not based on any performance from them. We've already agreed to it. It was agreed to by us. We did it. We have to pay for it.
Wouldn't it have been year 2020 and 2021 since that project started back in 2020?
I was like, did they do it out of their own pocket? Now we're paying them back? Or
So the way,
Way.
if I may answer Commissioner Stokes, the way the mid worked for the infrastructure is we identified projects around the mid property that the city would otherwise do for infrastructure. And we identified an amount of those projects, and the incentive was, hey, contractor for the mid, if you can get this done cheaper, we will pay you what we have budgeted for it. So you get it done. If you get it done cheaper, then you win. If it takes you more, we don't care. This is what we're going to pay you to get these infrastructure improvements done that the city already had planned to do in and around the mid property. So that's part of the economic development incentive project that we had for the mid. We had a similar one also for the Bohemian. So my understanding was the mid has already been paid for all the infrastructure improvements. So the big question I have on this item is, wasn't this already paid out in previous fiscal year?
It looked like we were paying half last year, half this year.
Pull it out. Pull it out, and move forward.
Because it's,
Pull it out and move forward.
yeah, it's
We
only,
still need to address it. I mean,
Well, we're gonna address it tomorrow.
okay.
all right.
All right,
Page 3 of 28.
but page 3,
Are we-
2 of 28, roadway projects. You'll see that the total request was $1.1 million. $1 million coming from fund balance. That's the bond proceeds that the city has already received. And the remaining, then $100,000 is a three-way split between water, sewer, and stormwater. 40, 40, and 40, 40, 40, and 20. I'm sorry, 40, 40, and 20, equaling $100,000.
But then how come it's still, why is it still showing not funded if it was part of a bond? Then it would be funded, wouldn't it?
It's already funded.
It's under, we're on IT fund?
No, roadway project.
Oh, sorry. Where don't I see that? Oh, there we are. Okay.
It's basically on the top
Yeah.
25%.
I see it. It's all, mine's blurry for some reason.
So if you go down to the total general fund, there's $3.8 million worth of requests, pay-go of $100,000, fund balance of $1.3 million. Again, the majority of that is from the bond proceeds. Then $266,000 grant in hand, $282,000 applications, and the remaining $1.8 million not being funding not being identified as of yet. The beach fund, the rails and decking. Let me back up a little bit. As part of the refinancing that we did to pay us back and increase our reserves, one of the things that we did was the casino building was to pull that back into the beach fund, to reimburse the beach fund for those expenses. So that helped out the fund balance significantly. We have about $2 million of fund balance over the threshold, so that there is ability to do some capital. So that's where you see a lot of these projects being recommended for expenditures out of the fund balance. So the rails and decking, $125,000. The beach property improvements, that conversation has always been the sales tax. So unless there's a policy change in that, that's why it's in the sales tax category. The casino elevator upgrades, again, using the fund balance amounts, and the repair structural pilings for $50,000, also from the fund balance.
I have a question about the property improvements. So when we adopt this budget, it's not the same as like we actually, like, is that, because we don't know if it's going to be $6 million, right?
Right.
It could be, we're projecting less. So how like set in stone is this? I want to use our sales tax money at the beach, but I don't want to say it's going to be $6 million is it gonna be 6 million unless there's flexibility?
There's authority up to $6 million.
Okay,
If you go over $6 million, then we have to come back to you and get the additional authority. If the $6 million is not spent, it falls back down to available funds for other purposes.
Just like street painting, we've budgeted 300,000 for that. I'm hoping we can do it for less.
Let's keep our fingers crossed.
okay.
Golf fund, there's a request of $150,000, which would be grant application.
So we're waiting on a grant for that. Then we're not going to spend that 150.
Right.
Fleet maintenance.
So then the garage fleet maintenance fund, the bucket truck, again, they've collected those funds up front in prior years. So taking it out of that fund balance, annual vehicle replacement, up to $200,000. Fuel tank replacement, was identified as a critical need last year. So we're taking, it's a little bit of a, not complicated, but complex funding strategy. We're taking $122,000 from PAYGO, from the water, sewer, and electric funds. And then $122,000 from the general fund balance, refuse fund balance, and then $30,000 from the parking and beach fund balances. Those two totals total the $670,000 replacement of the fuel tanks. But that is a critical need and needs to move forward with all certain kind of legal / environmental ramifications if it's not being done.
And they all use fuel.
And that's why it's allocated.
Yeah.
The way it is. The IT fund, all this was, I really should change it. It's coming from fund balance because those funds have already been borrowed for the computer service upgrades, the data recovery, network infrastructure, and network security upgrades for $50,000 each. Again, that was a 5-year borrowing. Those 5 years of requests were borrowed as part of the sales tax. And so I'll change that in presentation. The remaining conversation now is the enterprise or the ERP replacement, which is up to this point. The difficulty is funding, of course, and it's a very significant
Upgrade.
project going forward. But I think worthy of conversation. So that all being said, you'll see that the total governmental funds request $12 million. PAYGO $466,000. Fund balance of 2.2. Transfers from other funds is 0. Grant in hand of 266. Grant applications totaling 432. Sales tax $6.2 million. And then funding, which is not identified at the moment, of the remaining balance of $2.8 million. So now moving to the enterprise funds. Electric has the FDOT 6th Avenue improvements, $200,000 coming out or identified as PAYGO. And then the remaining, the 12 million, the trip, the line truck of 1.3 and NERC of $108,000. $108,000 is recommended to come out of PAYGO. And then the remaining, the 12 million to 30 million and 1.3, totaling $44,306,000 is recommended to come from funding as part of the Stantec modeling, pulling in that new new capitalization and borrowing. The water fund projects totaling $3.7 million, of which $990,000, the director is thinking that there will be grant availability, therefore providing a borrowing of $2.7 million. The local sewer 2.3 request, $150,000 for the manhole coming out of PAYGO, and the remaining from borrowing. And just to jump back a little bit, a lot of the PAYGO is for projects that are routine and customary, and anything under $500,000 attractive. Sometimes, depending upon fund balance, reserves and that kind of stuff, you can't do everything. But the definition of a capital program is anything $50,000 or more and exceeding 5 years in life. But there are capital needs that are annual. So if it's an annual need, the strategy should be as much as possible doing it from PAYGO. Otherwise, you're going to be paying debt service over a period of years. So over a period of years, you're paying more for the same thing if you would just do it through PAYGO. So turning the page, which is the last page for the current year appropriation. The sanitation fund, the heavy truck replacement, multi-camera system, the grapple truck, the north roof replacement of 90, and the sewer lift station in 25. You'll see that the roof replacement and the lift station are being recommended to pay through PAYGO. The camera and the grapple truck via fund balance, and a new borrowing from I'm sorry, and the heavy truck replacement out borrowing.
I have a question in regards to, do we depreciate those trucks?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so the borrowing, that's not a lease, we're buying these straight up?
Yes.
Okay, and it's, the interest rate is attractive enough for us to borrow it instead of using?
The lease options, historically, every time I have looked at them, are not comparable or competitive, I should say.
You know what I'm saying? The interest rate that we're going to pay when we buy them on the borrowing
Is much cheaper than the lease.
and it's better for us to do. It's not costing us. In other words, it's financially advantageous for us to do that versus just using PAYGO and just buying it outright and having it as an asset that depreciates
Well,
instead of an expense that depreciates.
Well, two different conversations. Anything, if you pay PAYGO or if you borrow, you depreciate.
Okay.
This really comes down to, this conversation is really a cash flow issue.
Okay.
Over the life, what's the net present values of those cash flows over the period of time? You're expanding the surface and stream. And typically, if I compare a lease to a borrowing, the borrowing comes out ahead.
No, what I'm saying is if we're going to pay 3% or whatever we're paying on the truck loan.
Well, and then let me finish. Okay. Now, all that being said, if you're just comparing the bond to a lease, PAYGO unequivocally is much better. It's a function of how much PAYGO space do you have?
Yeah.
And if these, I've said earlier, if this is an ongoing expenditure, you need to put it in your operating budget. So if you're buying $500,000 worth of trucks every year, you need to put that into your operating budget, because let's say that the asset has a 10-year
lifespan,
right? You're paying the $500,000 each year, or you're paying that same amount plus interest on the outstanding,
Correct.
You're paying much more if you're borrowing this, if it's a recurring expenditure. If it's a one-time expenditure every 5 years or something, then that's a different conversation.
I guess that's where I don't know, because I'm new to this position. How often do we have to buy a heavy truck replacement and how many are we buying?
This is a one-time expense.
This is one truck.
Every how many years?
That's what I'm asking. Do we do
And-
it every year or is this?
My question is, are we looking again at outsourcing? Waste management has grapple trucks. I just,
Because I don't have last year's budget, so I don't know how often do we buy these trucks? Does it make more sense to just pay for them outright versus spending money on interest?
I might be wrong, but this is a one-time purchase, not to be redone through the life of this.
So like next year, Jamie's not going to ask us for another truck.
sure he will.
But if you look
He
at the
will.
record-
Jamie, you hear that?
Good evening.
if you look at
Jamie,
the-
Mr. Brown, can you chime in, please?
He will.
Because this is under sanitation. So is this one truck that we need to buy that, or are we going to need to do this for the next 3 or 4 years?
So yes, we budget about $500,000 each year. We have a replacement schedule. Depending on how that particular truck is doing, we can sometimes push that schedule out further. But yeah, we have all of our vehicles, all of our heavy equipment on an actual replacement schedule.
So we buy one truck every year.
I put it back into state.
So then why wouldn't we, instead of borrowing money,
No, I agree with you.
move that over to PAYGO? Because I don't want to pay interest if we're doing this every year.
You're absolutely right. That was something I missed.
Okay, so we'll move that to PAYGO. Okay, thank you. That makes me feel better. I don't like giving people interest if we don't have to.
And my question is, at 500,000 a year, just in replacement parts,
I gotta use the bathroom.
can we be assured that outsourcing would cost us more?
Can you be assured that outside?
That's a question. Sorry?
You're saying would outsourcing cost more?
Yes.
Outsourcing the refuse function is far more entailed, more involved than just the purchasing of heavy equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The question is outsourcing cheaper than having our own trucks and labor? And
We
management?
had actually an assessment done a few years ago on the entire solid waste operation, with the result of that assessment being that it did not make sense for our city, our size, and the size of our fleet to outsource that function. And that was about 3 years ago that was done. Based on the same question you're asking me right now, would it make sense to put that actual operation out versus keeping it in-house? At that point in time, the answer was it did not make any sense financially, or just from a level of service standpoint, what the city is actually able to provide.
Good. Where are we at, Bruce?
Regional sewer fund. The regional sewer does a good job collecting the future years capital with current fee structures. So that's all coming out of fund balance. The pumps and the collection system improvements. Then the shared utility was a fleet last year. So the total enterprise funds, $52.8 million of requests. PAYGO of 6.3, but we had to move the heavy truck replacement to that category. Fund balance of 1.3 million. Grant applications of $990,000, and then new borrowing of $59.8 million, less than $500,000. So that is the appropriation for requests and recommendations for fiscal year 22. I won't go in as much detail with the plan, because the plan is just a plan. There's no commitment to it, but it does identify the needs going out. But I think the conversation will be next time talk about the ARPA funds. Is there an opportunity to roll forward some of those requests into current years, or rather than deferring it, doing it earlier rather than later? But essentially, that is the appropriation and the out years. But so with that, talking about the plan, it's the same format. you'll see that governmental funds, the general fund, if you take a look at page 5, there's a chiller replacement, annex plumbing, and the compass facility elevator upgrades, the police chiller upgrade, the library windows. Then we get into recreation. Again, the same format. There's nothing recommended in the funding sources in these years. The beach fund, there are some recommendations in the in fleet maintenance. But again, right now it's and in the enterprise fund, the primary funding source is borrowing.
My bigger concern for next year is the 2.5 million we get to pay the Bohemian and where we're gonna get that from.
Yes.
That's a lot more than a $50,000 or $90,000 salary. So that'd be a fun conversation.
So unless there's any additional questions.
Well, we're not voting on whether to pay it or not. That's already been done.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We just get to figure out how to pay it. That's the
Yeah.
fun part, folks.
Oh.
If we all take our quarters together and rubber them hard, will it turn into?
All right, what else?
Remember, we
So,
have 2 million in change in sales tax money tied up in the L&M project that in theory
Could
go
come
back
back.
to the pot to offset the expense for public parking, which was invested in the Bohemian development. You know, as we look at, from roundabout to Golfview, implementing a city, a downtown core parking system. So
Good stuff.
even though it's a big number, there is a pathway to get the funding.
You give us the map, the directions and a GPS, we should be all right.
and CRA's
So we're voting on,
participation.
Well, I think,
See?
Commissioner Robinson, I think the
Resolution.
motion that was taken before capital is actually the motion to adopt the operating and the capital.
Yes.
So
okay.
you may want to,
Can we just make sure we make those changes to the capital that we
Yes,
just talked about?
Most definitely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so now we're doing
New business.
new business.
If I could comment a little bit.
Good, go ahead.
I'm trying to find the page. There it is. I guess it is page 3 of 28. I just do want to draw our attention to the electric fund that we have in there, and it's new borrowing, 12 million for the second tie line, 31 million essentially for hardening. Very big chunks of money, 43 million roughly. I think those are areas that we really need to look at. I will be bringing some items forward on the 28th, but one of the things to think about is it reasonable to expect that either one of those items will bring in revenue to help pay for them? Sometimes you just have to do things because you have to do them and they don't generate any revenue. But if there are alternate approaches to do any of them, it seems like it's something that we should definitely be aware of or be looking into to make sure that those borrowings are long-term wise, because those are commitments that we'll be making for a long time. So I have some hesitations on them. And I just want to be on record for that.
Yeah, roads aren't very income producing either,
Vice Mayor, Ed Liberty, Utility Director, if I may respond to that. I think what Commissioner McBoy is referring to is the column on the right that says new borrowings. I think that's the source of funding for the projects that are shown on the left. Is that correct, Director of Finance?
That's correct.
Okay, so
Yes.
the borrowings, when it says new borrowings, that's the borrowing that we've already done, correct, Director of Finance?
No,
That's the next grouping.
that's the next tranche.
Okay, So those projects were all outlined in the capital plan for improvement to the electric utility infrastructure. The basic blocking and tackling that has to happen to get our system to perform on par with our neighbors and let alone the other municipal utilities in the state in terms of reliability. So those are all reliability improvements. They're not anything else but that. So it's going into infrastructure and reliability improvement.
How much is after this borrowing? Is there still more borrowing? So we've already borrowed once, at least. And then this is the next tranche. And then is there more planned for the SHRIP projects? How many times are we going to be borrowing for SHRIP?
Always.
I think in total, that if I go back to the Stantec plan, it was spread over about 3 or 4 different borrowings of different sizes. And the concept was to not borrow any more at any one time. And then we could effectively manage and spend over about a 3-year period of time, because we're not allowed to borrow money and then sit on it. So it's spread over time. So these were all projects that were aimed at improving our infrastructure, which was 1970s or earlier, and not capable of withstanding a category 1, 2, or 3 storm. So we're building everything up to category 5. So it was a long-term phased approach. Roll it all out. And next borrowing is probably going to be in the range of $33 to $35 million, if I remember correctly, and that's probably in the mid-calendar 22 timeframe before we anticipate having to do that.
And then after that, there'll be more maintenance and hardening.
Well, that we should always be doing maintenance as part of the reason we got the position that we're in today. The maintenance was deferred for decades, not just 1 or 2 or 3 administrations. It's been deferred.
And you have the income to pay off the borrowing. Good. Thank you. Everybody all set? Bruce, new business? Are we there?
New business.
All
I
right.
think I did my piece.
There's new business item, please.
A, B, C, and D.
The resolutions for stormwater refuse.
Oh, I'm sorry.
These are the missing pages.
Resolution
61.
stormwater.
Just give us the bottom line.
Right, the first is resolution 61.1, establishes stormwater annual assessment for fiscal year 21-22. Essentially, the resolution establishes the annual assessment rate for stormwater services for fiscal year 21-22 in the amount of $78.25 per equivalent residential unit for ERU. There is no change in rate from the prior fiscal year.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Malega, seconded by Stokes.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 Refuse services.
Yes, next one is resolution 62/2021, establish the refuse services annual assessment for fiscal year 21-22. Again, summary, this resolution is the annual assessment resolution setting the special assessment fee of $245.15 per equivalent residential unit. Also ERU for refuse services for fiscal year 21-22. And again, there is no change in the rate for prior fiscal year.
And that's what we've seen from Stantec. And motion to approve.
Nope, we
Motion
can't.
to approve.
Second.
So that McVoy,
Yes.
Yes, you were asking for a motion to approve because you
Yes.
were and McBoy did it.
and you
I
seconded it?
Yep.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Administrative charges.
Administrative charges for fiscal year 22 for services and charges for current services of the general fund to enterprise operations and special revenue funds. The city of Lake Worth Beach administrative charges or charges for current services includes all costs related to services performed by general fund activities for the enterprise fund operations and the benefit thereof. The total of the charges is $5,349,896, of which $2,223,878 comes from electric, $1,241,160 comes from water, $899,780 from the local sewer, $734,308 from the regional sewer, $250,770 from refuse, again totaling $5,349,896.
It balances.
Is this 8% across the board?
No.
You said, you shook your head yes, and he said no.
No.
The question,
Okay, so question, if we're adopting a policy to be 8% across the board, why aren't we doing
This is
that?
this is a different thing. This is services that the city, the core of the city provides to each of these enterprise funds.
This is to go towards the general fund, is it not?
Yes, it is.
So it is not a different thing. It's the same bucket.
This is part of your. There are two
Buckets.
basics, yes.
Bucket one,
Sub bucket.
Bucket one is the 8%. I call it pilot payment in lieu. It's also called
franchise fee, whatever.
franchise fee, exactly. The other one is the indirect chargebacks.
Okay, so is bucket two is that the next item for contribution from enterprise operations? Would that be item D?
Should have done a better job.
You have two, Bruce.
Okay, good. Yes,
So that would be item D is going to be 8%.
yes.
So item A is based on what percentage? Or C is based on what?
Item C is based on the percentage of the operating budget and capital budget over the years. And so you take a percentage of all those different expenditures because you have to support all that activity. Okay,
So it varies from department to department?
from department to department, year to year.
Okay, thank you. Motion to approve. Thank you for the clarity.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for taking me to the next one.
Wait,
we're going to accept this, adopt it. We need a vote.
Yes.
And you
Yep.
second.
Second.
Made the motion, you making the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Opposed. Nobody's opposed. Motion was to adopt the administrative charges. Let's adopt the contribution from the enterprise operation.
All right, item D, fiscal year 22 contribution from enterprise operations are a portion of enterprise receipts made to the general fund. So this is the gross receipts times 8%. The city of Lake Worth Beach contributions from enterprise operations are based on current service levels. Contribution amounts are calculated based on the percentage of the budget of the enterprise operation. The contributions from enterprise operations are received annually and budgeted accordingly. The fiscal year 22 contribution from enterprise operations totals $7,859,631, of which $4,991,120 comes from electric, $1,355,103 from water, $811,558 from local sewer, $165,883 from stormwater, and $535,966 from refuse. And again, totaling $7,859,631.
Motion to
approve.
approve. Second.
Second.
Mr. McVoy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. And motion to adjourn.
You officially adopted your first municipal budget.
Woo!
I quit.
Hey, we're curious, Tom.
Out of here.
Far from
No, yeah,
wishful thinking.
there's a lot to, because we've done it that way before, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best way to do it.
Correct.
It's been done, so we're moving forward.
We're starting fresh. We get to start fresh, moving forward.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.